As you know, many sites, and these days I say most sites, display ad content. And that ad content should change on each request so users see something different each time they come to your page. The AdRotator control makes this really easy. It reads information about images, or a list of images, from an XML file. And it displays the appropriate content each time the page is refreshed. You can control how often certain images appear in proportion to other images. You can control which images appear at all. Let's test out the page to see what the AdRotator control feels like. To test the AdRotator control, I have a simple page which includes pictures of current or previous authors on this course, and pictures of cute furry animals. Sometimes pictures fall into both categories, but in this case I can choose which kind of thing I'd like to show. If I choose cute furry animal, as I refresh the page, I get a cute furry animal. Let me press F5 to refresh the page again, and I get a different cute furry animal. If I choose author, I get an author. Press F5. I get a different author, and randomly, it looks like me a lot. Ooh, boy. There we go. I'd random author again. I did not make my picture show up more often than everybody else's. Really, I didn't. And if I choose both, then it randomly selects from either kind of picture as I refresh the page. In any case, I can control which kind of image appears as I refresh the page. Either cute furry animal, author, or both. We'll see there is a weighting system to control the weight of importance of each image, so you can control some images appearing more often than others. If I select the image, click on it, you'll see that it takes me to another page that lets me know which item was selected. That way you can react to the user clicking on the ad and do something specific, like redirect them to a certain page, add a penny to the amount you owe those people or they owe you, and so on. Here you can see there's also a tooltip that appears specific for each image. If I refresh it, here you'll see a tooltip for that particular image. And again, if I click on it, it tells me which image I selected. In order to make the AdRotator control work, you have to supply an XML file, and the XML file has to contain, for each image, the image URL, which includes the name and location of the image, the navigate URL, which is where you want to navigate once the image is selected, alternate text, which is the descriptive text for that image, a keyword, which allows you to supply a category for the advertisement, and impressions, which provides a relative weight, allowing you to control, well, the distribution of the randomness. Something with a higher weight value appears more often. Optionally, you can provide any other information you care to include, so you can categorize things, make choices about things. Anything besides image URL, navigate URL, and so on is just disregarded by ASP.NET, but your code can retrieve that information once the item has been selected and make different choices based on that information. The XML file might look something like this. In this case, we have our advertisements, main element, and then for each image we have an add element. There'll be multiples of those, one for each image. In this case, we supply the image URL, which tells it where to find the URL, a navigate URL, which tells it where to go. And in this case, you'll see we're going to add response.aspx, and we're passing a parameter, which is selected equals, and the value is rabbit in this case. The alternate text is the text that appears in the tooltip as you hover over the picture. Impressions in this case is 49. Those values are just random. For impressions, ASP.NET sums up the impression value for each one of the ads, gets a total value, and assigns a weight then as a proportion of the total. So for example, if the total number of impressions of all the ads, say, was 1,000, and this one had an impression of 49, then it would show up 49 1,000ths of the time in a random selection. It isn't totally random because it's weighted, so it's a weighted random selection. We've applied a keyword, animal, so we know what group this ad appears with, and also animal type, which is not something that ASP.NET knows anything about. That's a custom property that allows us to specify information about this advertisement image that ASP.NET will never use, but our code can, as you'll see. Note that the navigate URL doesn't have to include a parameter. On the other hand, if you don't, it's difficult for the page you go to know what you selected. In this case, there will be code on the page we go to that gets the query string property of the request parameter of the page, and we check the selected property and display the right-hand side of that equal sign on the page itself. You saw that happen already. It told us what was selected as we went to another page. Notice again that we've added a custom element, animal type. It's important to understand that ASP.NET just passes that information through to you, and you can retrieve that, and we'll look at code that does that in just a moment. You can set the target frame, that is where you want the result of clicking the link to take you. If your page contains frames, you can set the target frame by name. Or you can select from predefined targets like _blank takes you to a new window, _parent goes to the frame set parent, _self is in the current frame, _top is in the current full unframed window. So you can select the target property for this AdRotator control so it knows where to display the new page. The default value is _top, so that whether you're using a frame set or not, the new page renders as a full page, replacing the current page in the browser. If you want to use a new browser window, select _blank as the target. Let's show this in a demonstration. With the sample page open, I've selected our AdRotator control. Let's look at the Properties window and set the target property to blank. And let's revisit the page now. I'll save everything and run this page. And now when I click on the AdRotator control, you'll see that we get the target page in a new browser window, as opposed to replacing the original page in the original browser window. If you have frames, you can control exactly which frame the output goes to. You probably also noticed that we have this radio button control, which allows us to control which set of images we see. Well, how does that work? Here, if we look at the source for this control, you'll see that the radio button control, here is a list of 3 items with a value of animal, author, or an empty string. Those are our 3 possible values for the items in this list. Well, how does that affect our code? Let's go look at the code for this page. And you'll see here that the selected index changed event of that radio button list control sets the keyword filter property of our AdRotator control. We get the value of the selected item and we put it into the keyword filter property, and the keyword filter property then takes the keywords. Let's see where that is. There it is. And now here within our XML file, you'll see that we use the keyword to filter the images that we see. If it's animal, we only see images that have the keyword of animal. If it's author, only those that have author. And finally, if it's an empty string, there is no keyword filtering and any image can be displayed. Between the time the control loads and the page is rendered, there's an event that occurs. That's the AdCreated event. And the AdCreated event allows you to step in and control or take more control over what image gets displayed. Now, you're handed this AdCreated event args object E. And what does E have in it? Well, let's go see. You'll see E gets an AdProperties object, which is a dictionary, which contains all the advertisement properties for the currently displayed advertisement. It gets alternate text, that is the alternate text information. It gets the image URL and the navigate URL. So you get those specifically called out. The AdProperties is what we'll need to use to retrieve anything that was a user-defined property, like the animal type. If you'll remember, if we look at that XML, there is an animal type. ASP.NET knows nothing about that, but we can retrieve it in the code using that AdProperties property. Now I have code here I've already commented out, which does some interesting things. It says if the image URL points to this image, then force it to be a different image, just showing you that you can control which image actually appears. If I make this change and uncomment this code, you will never see this image, no matter how many times you iterate through this page. Also, I can retrieve a value from the AdProperties collection, and we have to specify by name the name of the element we want to retrieve, which is animal type, and we'll display that in label info on the page. Let me uncomment this stuff. And let's run the page again. I'll save it. And here we'll view it in the browser. Now we see here the animal type. If I refresh this a few times, you see here the animal type appears. What's more, we'll never see the image for our friend Andy because we've checked if his image is about to be displayed and we change it to something else altogether. So we've gotten in there in the AdCreated event handler and added our own code to change what gets displayed on the page. The XML control is really not terribly glamorous, but it allows you to display XML either raw or formatted on your page. You supply the XML content and optionally an XSL transform, and the control takes care of displaying that content on your page. It's a simple control. It's only got a few properties and no events at all, but it does save some effort when working with XML so you can display its output on the page. At design time, you can set the document source property, which is an XML file, and the transform source, which is the XSL file, if you have one to be displayed. Well, let's run a simple demo that shows off this behavior. Here's our sample page, xmlcontrol.aspx in design view, and I've dragged from the toolbox an XML control onto the page, and as you can see, it's somewhat underwhelming at design time. There are some properties you can set, and there really aren't too many interesting ones that you might want to set. Well, they're really only the ones you want to set are document source and transform source. The document source allows you to specify, you can use this dialog if you want, to specify the source of the XML content, and you can also specify the source of the transform content. Now, this is not a course on XML and XSL, so I'm not going to focus on it here, but my XML content looks like this. It's very simple. That is, it's got a weather element and a type attribute, and two elements inside, temperature and wind information, kind of hard-coded XML, maybe the result of calling some web service somewhere. We also have an XSL transform, and again, this is sort of outside the scope of this course, but I can point you through some of the issues here. Templates in XSL match elements within XML and determine formatting. So here we have a template looking to match the weather element. And if it finds a match, it outputs a header 1 and then an element which is the value of the type attribute and then the end of the header 1. Go back to the XML. You'll see the type was current conditions. Now it says apply templates. That causes the XSL to be recursively applied to the remainder of the XML. And so now we look for other stuff. We find a match against temp, for example, and we output a list item with the word temperature, and then here the Fahrenheit with the degree mark. And here we have a match against the wind element, and here we output a list item with wind, and then we call this recursively, and it goes down and gets the content within there. It did the same thing back here, by the way, which gets us the value followed by MPH. So we'll take this content and display it in a formatted output. Now I know you're excited to see what the output looks like, so let's render this page. View in the browser. And as you can see, we get an H1 element, which is the type attribute from the XML, and then we get temperature and wind formatted as described in that XSL template. This is the world's simplest example showing off how to work with the XML control. At least it does demonstrate how you can use XML and XSL together to format the contents within a web page. If you're retrieving values from a web service, this can be a really useful control. If you'll remember, we set properties for this control at design time, transform source and document source, and of course those now show up here in the markup for the control. But you can also set those, if you want, in your code at runtime. In code, you can set the source property for the XML content in several ways. You can set the document. In that case, you'll specify a system.xml.xml document instance. You can set the document content. In that case, you specify an XML string. Someone might hand you an XML string, for example, like I mentioned before, the results of calling a web service. And in that case, you can just take that XML string, stuff it into the document content property, and you're ready to roll. Document source, that's the only way you can do it at design time. That lets you specify the name of a file. The other two, document and document content, you can also set in code. Actually, you can set all three in code. You can only set the document source property at design time. The same holds for the transform, the XSL. You can either set the transform property, which lets you specify a system.xml.xsl.xsl transform instance. That's an object which contains the XML stream. Or this one, also available at design time, is the transform source property. That one allows you to specify the name of a file that contains the XSL content. But that really makes up everything you need to know about the XML control.